our ancestors, she was a mythic place, a haven from famine and oppression. Ilan Ur, the fresh land, they called her. With their hearts and hands, their laughter and their songs, they made her their own. This story is not one to be found in the history books. Rather, it has been passed down through the generations, from mother to daughter, from father to son, from the dead to the living. It is that particular brand of Irish humour and wit, of loyalty to family, community and religion, that gift for storytelling, a flair for politics. Most of all, it is a fierce belief in our new country, alongside a deep love and sometimes as deep as sorrow for the land we left behind. It is a feeling that rests in the heart of every Irish American, a journey with so many unexpected surprises, whose end we have yet to discover.
Grandfather came over. He crossed over on a sailing ship in the 1890s, and it was a very tumultuous crossing, very storm-tossed, and he landed at Castle Gardens, which was the immigrant station before Ellis Island opened up. And after he cleared through customs, he went across the street to a little church that's still there, Our Lady of the Rosary. And he went into, as a young man, very religious, he went over to say a prayer of thanksgiving, that he was still alive after this horrible crossing. And he was kneeling saying his prayers, and an Irish priest, who was a parish priest, came along and said, "Welcome to America, Patty." And he said, "Father, you know my name."
From the 1600s to the present day, men and women from every county and parish in Ireland have left their homes and loved ones to begin life again in this new land. Rich and poor, Catholic and Protestant, fortune seekers and refugees, we gave up everything we knew in the hope that something better awaited us in America.
You'd think you'd know how you're going to feel about that, but I didn't know how overcome I was going to be as soon as the ship pulled out from the river into Cork Harbour and out into the Atlantic Ocean, and twilight was descending and getting dark, and I could see the coastline receding and the lights twinkling away, and my heart was breaking, because I suddenly felt very Irish. I never felt very Irish before, but the idea of, I was looking at that land and I said, "Oh my God, let me off, I want to go home again," even though I was excited over America.
They say this New York City's a wonderful sight, with the people all working by day and by night. They don't sow barley, potatoes, or wheat, but there's gangs of them digging for gold in the street.
The old line about the Irish coming to New York expecting to find streets of gold, and they found not only were the streets not paved with gold, they weren't paved at all, and they were expected to pave them.
Over 44 million Americans trace their ancestral roots back to Ireland. As a group, our experience in this country is too vast, too varied to be captured and understood in this brief encounter. But even in fleeting recollections, a story emerges that suggests something truly spectacular has been taking place.
Some of the Irish had gone through a very, very hard time, and that's why they came to this country. They wanted to make a better life for their families and have not only freedom to vote for their elected officials, but freedom for their religion and freedom for the schools that they wanted to send their child to, and freedom to grow up in a nation that was free. That was very strong. That was a strong part, and that's why they became a strong element in America, because of what they had gone through, the sufferings.
Most of us arrived with little in the way of money or possessions. The 1.5 million of us who came in the years of the famine, the late 1840s and early 1850s, were lucky to arrive with our lives. Over 1 million had died behind us in Ireland, victims of starvation and grave injustice. Yet in scarcely more than a century, a few generations' time, we rose from the slums of cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston to the point where one of our own had been elected President of these United States. To truly comprehend how we accomplished this feat, you'd have to be Irish. And if that's not possible, you'd have to at least come to understand something of the unique character of the Irish people.
Well, with the G.K. Chesterton wrote a little verse about the great gales of Ireland, the men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry and all their songs are sad. The war, I think it was vice versa, but it was an Englishman's perspective. All their wars were sad and all their songs, most of the songs are merry, all passionate.
The Irish have very large expectations. They're dreamers, but I don't think in the sense of being practical in any way. They combine incredible practicality and hard work and drive towards achievement with very large vision.
Every Irishman I know, and that includes Irish women as well, they're one-man shows. There's a certain cockiness, sureness, way, style about them.
We weren't lazy or willing to work. That's why we left Ireland, because there was no work. So when we came to a place where there was work, we were glad to do it.
A growing America had plenty of work for us, even if most of it involved a pick and a shovel. Irish will and Irish muscle were the forces behind the building of much of America, from the subways to the skyscrapers, the Erie Canal to the Transcontinental Railroad. Even the Brooklyn Bridge was constructed in large part by Irish workers. We were often required to perform the most grueling and dangerous tasks. So many of us perished on the job, it became popular to hear, "You'll never see a grey-haired Irishman." A cruel joke had too much truth to it. In time, we learned what we needed to do to better our situation. We learned to organise. Irish leadership in the labour movement was instrumental in improving abusive and unsafe work conditions. And while Irish men could often be seen labouring in the streets, many Irish women could be found in America's finer homes, cooking and cleaning.
When I think of my mother, she was a young girl, a beautiful young girl, talented and good singer, and her brothers, there were 10 brothers, they wanted to go to America because there wasn't enough for them all on a little farm in Leitrim. They came to America and the men went to work in a tire factory in Akron. They went to Ohio. She, being a young Irish girl, no questions asked, she was just put immediately in to domestic work, in the scullery, swabbing and cleaning and scrubbing.
We were used to hard work, if only that were enough to make our dreams come true. Too many doors were closed to us.
There was a time when people came to New York and met signs like "No Irish Need Apply." It was a very hostile climate. And it was really the church and the church leaders and the clergy who helped them believe in themselves, come together, support each other and fight for their rights as people and the right to be here and the right to play a part in this community. And great monuments like St. Patrick's Cathedral owe their existence to the hard-working Irish who came here out of great poverty. Most of the money they earned, they sent it back home to keep their families. But they also saw that the church was what helped them to be what they were in this country and identified very closely with it.
It is the transatlantic institution. It is the thing that they leave in Ireland they come to in the United States. It is the thing that brings continuity to their life. It is the thing that brings discipline. They start their own school system in the United States. Rather than just put their kids in the public schools, the Irish start the parochial school system in the United States to educate their own children.
Another source of our strength was our keen sense of humour. Often straight-faced, but always packing a wallop.
The Irishman that was in this country, he was a bachelor, and all he had was a dog.
And the story goes about the lady who had a cat, and her cat got very, very old, and the cat died.
the dog died, he was very disturbed, very annoyed, very upset. He went to the priest. Instead of the parish priest.
She said, Father, would you say a little service for me cat?
Want to know, would he say a mass for the dog? Would he say the voted Catholic? And the priest says, I don't know, he says.
I'm terrible sorry for your trouble, and I know now you must miss the poor old cat, and I know it's a sad occasion, but we don't say a service for a cat.
The church doesn't allow things like that. The poor Pat was very disappointed, and he was leaving the rectory. And as he was leaving the rectory, he turned around to the priest, and he said to the priest,
Well, she says, you leave me no choice to go down the road. The minister said he'd say a lovely service for $300.
the priest says, come back, Pat, he says, sit down and we'll talk this over. So Pat came back and he sat down. And the priest turned around to Pat and he says,
You never told me your cat was a Catholic.
now when we go up to St. Peter and see a little dog running around there, we know it's Catholic.
Why do we laugh? Humor kind of makes you realize that, you're only, life is it's short. You've got to enjoy it. You've got to see the funny side. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. How many times I have laughed at myself? And my father, too, used to kid him, the quiet man. When he laughed silently, but the tears would roll down his face.
I tell the story of the meanest man in the town of Kilshamar, who used to kick dogs around and pinch babies and make them cry, and he shortchanged people in his dry goods store, and he died. There was a funeral mass, and only 6 or 7 people showed up. And when it came time for the eulogy, the priest got up and said it's time for the eulogy, and he looked around, and there was no eulogist. So he asked, would some nice person in the parish please stand up and say a few nice words about our dear departed friend? And everyone put their head down because he was a mean man. And no one would rise. And so the priest said with a much more firm voice, someone get up and say something. It's the custom to have a eulogy here, and a eulogy we'll have. And everyone put their head down again except for an old chap in the back who took his cap in his hand, stood up. He said his brother was worse. Now that to me is typical Irish humor.
And that is one of the God-given gifts that the Irish have. I used to get insulted from people who say, you have the gift of the blarney, or something like that. It's not blarney, it's the ability to communicate. We all have that.
I think the average Irish person is a natural politician. They tend to be very outgoing, they tend to be very demonstrative of injustice and wrongdoing. And really the essence of politics is to change the status quo, or to change the situation where people are being deprived of whatever it is that they should have. And the Irish are very, very conscious, due to their historical background, of deprivation. They understand what it's all about.
My dad said when I asked him once why the Irish acquired all this political power in America and New York, places like New York, Boston, Chicago, and he said, well, because when most of the immigrants got off the boat, they asked, where can I work? And when the Irish got off the boat, they asked, where do I vote?
Every year they ran candidates. Every year the candidates lost. The next year they'd run them again, and they'd lose again. But they did whatever they could to get ahead, and they didn't lose faith in the system.
They had everything going for them, but they had no voice, and that's how they got their voice, was through politics. There was scarcely ever an Irishman that wasn't in politics. People like senators, congressmen. They had a voice, they had a say in everyday affairs, and that's what put the Irish up on the map in America.
Politics was just one way that we looked after one another. We'd always been a social people by nature, and our crowded urban villages were becoming so full of old neighbours, they seemed at times like far-flung counties of Ireland.
I can remember this vividly when my parents would meet other people that I hadn't seen before. The very first question that they would ask each other is, and where are you from? Well, from Mayo. I'm really from Mayo. From Ballyhonus. In your town? No, I'm from the town on Clonagalley near Ballyhonus. and they would reduce it down to a microscopic level so that then they would know, oh yes, I know so-and-so from that village, quote unquote, it's a townland really, and then identify themselves. That was their identity, that very local place.
It was hard at times not to feel homesick for the people and places we'd once known so well. Newspapers like the Irish Echo helped, bringing welcome news from home.
In 1928, the Irish Echo was founded by Charlie Connolly, and he was an Irish-born typesetter here in New York. He recognized that there was a dearth of information on Ireland, and so he founded the paper. It was a weekly then, broadsheet. It cost a dime, and I think there were like 8 pages. And he had 2 friends, Beastie and Burke, sounds like a vaudeville team, who rented a laundry truck, and they used to take this horse-drawn truck and go barreling down the cobblestones of New York and deliver papers to wherever the Irish congregated, at sports stadiums and churches and bars and wherever. In those days, in the 20s, people were here and knowing full well that they'd never return home. It was a touchstone. And I think it remains that to this day.
And if we couldn't return to Ireland, we sometimes accomplished the next best thing, sending back enough money to bring our loved ones here. For we belonged together, and when we were reunited, our hearts were merry indeed.
Basically, the word Cayley means a get-together. And you don't have to be Irish to enjoy Cayley's. You can be of any nationality. I love to go to Cayley's. I'm not a great dancer, but I'm able to move from spot to spot.
I never took up dancing, although I would go to Irish dances, but I was hopeless. I had 2 left feet, and the girls would say to me, I'm tired of clumping around again. I felt terrible.
As Aunt Jude would say, when you go to the dances, don't dance too close. Always make room for the Holy Ghost.
Many of us had come to America with the thought that we would return someday to our beloved Ireland. This country was to be but a temporary arrangement until times were better. What we found instead was a new home, a new life, and a new future as Irish Americans.
They were ever so happy, they were ever so sad. They grow old in a new world, the good times and bad. All the parties and weddings, the Cayleys and wakes, when New York was Irish, full of joy and heartbreak.
As we moved into the American mainstream, we never cast off the traditions we carried with us from the old country, those much cherished values, ties to family, and our sustaining faith. The Catholic Church, which had been our solace through all the troubled times, would always claim a special place in our hearts.
I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Indeed, it was sometimes hard to tell where the church began and our Irishness left off. where it was there to baptize us, confirm and marry us, even to bury us. It guided us on this earth and beyond.
This church here was built almost entirely by the Irish community. It was a very important part of their life and their faith and their culture. They were all one, and to be involved in it at every level was important to them. So, the church was what gave them their strength and support and helped them through difficult times. And of course they were there for the church to provide for its needs.
The church remained the steadfast guardian of our Irish spirit.
Monsignor Quintanan baptized all the children. And so I would come in with the Spanish name, and he would make it Irish right away. He'd say, he wouldn't speak to my husband because we weren't married in church. And so he'd say, Rosemary, what's the child's name? His name is Miguel Jose. I christen thee, Michael Joseph. Then the second one, what's the child's name? Maria Providencia. I christen thee, Mary of Providence.
My godfather never showed up. He was drunk in a speakeasy on Atlantic Avenue, and my mother was very agitated, and somebody else had to be appointed as godfather. My mother was so upset she dropped me right into the baptismal font, and I could have been drowned, but I was sucked up by the altar boy. And the priest said, oh, the little kid now is a Baptist. He has experienced total immersion, which enraged my father. He said, don't call my son a Protestant.
Chicago Irish settled around the center of the city, the near south side and the near west side, St. Columkills Parish and Holy Family Parish on the west side, and then in Bridgeport and back of the yards on the south side. So there was, like all immigrant groups, they settled close to the center of the city because that's where their jobs were. But by the beginning of the 20th century, the Irish, especially in Chicago, were already moving up the ladder. I mean, they were more likely to go to college than other young people of the same age group.
In Boston, the Irish first had settled in areas like Roxbury, West Roxbury, Dorchester, South Boston, and even earlier than that, the North End. And then they gradually began to move out of those areas. And as the Irish prospered, they would move even further out of the city. So they didn't stay in those early kind of ghetto sections of Boston where they had been.
My family originally arrived in New York in 1847, Black 47. They stayed on the Lower East Side for 50 years, and then in about 1900, between 1900 and 1914, they passed to the Promised Land, which was the Bronx.
All over America, we were moving out of our first-generation inner-city enclaves, out into new neighborhoods, new jobs, maybe into a home of our own, reaching for an Irish slice of the American pie. The church, ever at the heart of Irish life, came right along with us.
People now ask you what community you came from, and you can tell them South Ozone Park and Richmond Hill. But back then, people asked what parish are you from. In my case, I lived in Our Lady of Perpetual Help Parish.
And our parish at that particular time was a place called Our Lady of Refuge.
We lived in the Bronx in Sacred Heart Parish.
You said you lived in St. Margaret's Parish, and everybody knew precisely where that was, and if you were at a dance and you pinpointed it, the guy would know if he was willing to go that far out to take you home.
The parish defined our neighbourhood, but more important, it shaped and nourished our children, offering them something they'd have to succeed in a changing America.
One of the first things the Irish community set about doing was putting up the school, because they wanted good education and they wanted Catholic education for their children.
And so our schools were named for the saints, St. Catherine's, St. Teresa's, St. John's, and we were supposed to behave according to saintly example. Lord, it was a struggle.
Some of the nuns that were extremely strict. Sister John the Baptist, I'll never forget her. Never.
I was taught a wonderful education by the sisters, but it was strict. I got hit in the hand by the ruler a number of times for being a bad boy, and if I grinned or laughed in class when I wasn't supposed to, I got hit with the ruler and the hands again. But it taught me that I had to have respect and dignity, and when I told them at home, I got punished at home.
But the discipline was also tempered with devotion.
I got sick with scarlet fever, and I was out for a number of weeks, and it looked like I would be not allowed to go on with that class. But the nun kept me every day after school to bring me up to date on what I had lost time with. And I stayed with that classroom. I graduated. And I was very proud that when I graduated, my average was 94. And that was a very good average.
Our goal as second-generation Irish was not merely a job, but a profession. Something that offered what we had rarely been able to achieve: financial security for our families.
Mom and Dad would often say, when you become a police officer or a fireman, you'll never be rich. There'll always be a turkey on the table at Thanksgiving, and your children won't go hungry. And they were right.
A civil service job next to becoming a priest or a nun, it was nothing better in an Irish family than to join the civil service. I remember in my own life my father was a judge in New York and I was a court officer in the Bronx, and going up to his chambers and saying I wanted to quit to go back to Fordham to go to graduate school to study history, and he forbade me. He said, you never leave a civil service job. The only thing that takes you out of a civil service job is death.
We flocked to the most secure professions: teaching, transportation, public utilities, the fire department, and most noticeably, the cop on the beat.
At one time, going back to the turn of the century, the New York City Police Department was probably comprised of over 75% either Irish or Irish Americans. The number is still quite strong.
But the Irish in Boston have always been drawn towards the police force. The first Irish immigrant joined the police force here in 1851, and from that day right now to the present, they've been a major power and force.
Over the years, there's only 2 chiefs of police in the history of San Francisco that weren't Irish.
Even the police vehicle that arrived at the scene of civic mayhem was thought of as being Irish.
Well, the reason the paddy wagon is so known is believed to be because as they rounded up the people taking them to the jail, most of the occupants of the wagon were Irish that were involved in one type of a fight or another from the Irish bars. The second version, of course, is that that's not true, that the reason they're known as paddy wagons is those who operated the wagons were Irish and therefore known as paddies.
The religious parish was a mainstay of the Irish-American community, and many neighbourhoods remained clearly defined. But America also loved to stir the pot.
They talk about, like, say, the Irish went with the Irish and the Jewish went. I didn't find that to be the case in the Bronx. I mean, we had all nationalities, and they were very supportive of us. We used to have great gatherings with the Fitzpatricks and the McPeaks and Mrs. Shywitz and the Petrosinis. My father got the Petrosini boys jobs in the A&P. Everyone helped everyone else.
There were, however, certain defining rituals most of us chose to hold on to.
Well, there was one great phenomenon on Saturday, I remember, and that was confession. Every little kid went to confession on Saturday. And all over the neighborhood, even the biggest hoodlums, would all be scrubbed down and cleaned. And they had to get home by about 3 o'clock. They get all cleaned up, put good clothes on, and off they went to confession. And it was streams and streams of little kids all converging on Sacred Heart Church and boring the poor priest to death.
I kicked my brother twice. I hit my sister once. And I disobeyed my sweet mother precious.
We had this image that the soul was around here somewhere on your chest. It's some white area, and it's clean when you're born, except for original sin, which you get rid of when you're baptized. But then you start accumulating these other sins, and there's these festering blotches, abscesses on this white area, and these are the mortal sins, and you have to get rid of them by going to confession. And you do, and then you clean again. Freud couldn't understand this, because he couldn't understand the power of the church, and that's why he was always running for Rome. Although he said he hated it, but that power is not the psychological effect of confession. tremendous.
And if confession was sustenance for the soul, could Irish cooking do the same for the body?
The Irish have always had a kind of uneasy relationship with food. My father used to say food is a shock to the system.
My mother was a dreadful cook. And her mother before, everything's well done. Everybody would relate to that, I think, that has had an Irish mother or Irish grandmother. Everything was very well done, to the point where it was leathery at its best.
Miss Mulligan wanted to taste it, but really there wasn't no use. They worked at it over an hour, and they couldn't get none of it loose. Till Kelly come in with the hatchet, and Murphy come in with the saw. That cake was enough for the powers to paralyze any man's jaw.
If you find an Irish cookbook in the cookbook section of the bookstores, you'll find they're very skinny little books.
Now there was plums and prunes and cherries, there was citrons and raisins and cinnamon too. There was nutmeg, cloves and berries, and the crust was nailed on with glue. There were caraway seeds in abundance, sure 'twould build up a fine stomach ache. It would chill them and spice up the rate in a slice of Miss Fogarty's Christmas cake.
Corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day and boiled potatoes is traditional Irish fare. And that's really Irish American. It's not even Irish.
It's ham and cabbage and almond. And here the corned beef is different than ham. But it's, you get used to it pretty fast.
We used to make a jello then for St. Patrick's Day, and it was orange jello, vanilla ice cream, and green jello. She used to make the Irish flag, for years and years. She always made that mold up of the Irish flag.
The surest sign we Irish Americans had made it was when the family could afford to go on a summer's vacation.
In Boston, Hampton Beach up in New Hampshire was a great place for the Irish too, and there again they would have their own, summer homes up around there. And then down towards the Cape, I think Situate and that area would be a place where they would begin to go in the summertime. There were the sort of fancy Yankee yacht clubs wouldn't, of course, allow the Irish to join, and so they would have to develop their own places and their own clubs and their own sort of communities, and so they did.
Well, Rockaway Beach here in New York was known as the Irish Riviera.
Rockaway was our paradise. We spent summers in tents along the beach, down near where Fitzgerald's used to be on 108th Street, then later in bungalow courts all around the seaside section. It had everything. The Atlantic Ocean, all-night Irish music, singing and dancing, our very own amusement park. No wonder a large part of Rockaway became known as Irish Town.
And on 103rd Street there was about 8 Irish cabaret bar type arrangements. And usually they were quite big ballrooms really, and room for, I'm sure, 300, 400, 500 people to dance. And you could watch the entire show from the sidewalk and look in.
And we looked in on the finest Irish entertainers in America. And the most famous of them all was the legendary McNulty family.
Ma McNulty was a very distinguished looking lady, white hair. She wore that big skirt like the Dolly Madison type of person. And she played a little button accordion. Peter and Eileen would dress in top hat and tail and carry cane. And they would sing. Peter would play the fiddle. It was that electrifying. They call it the Irish Showboat, McNulty's Irish Showboat.
So goodbye Mike and so long Pat, Nicky, Stick, Kate and Mary. The anchors waved and raised up they rave in Tipperary. There's a steamer blazing up, I can no longer stay. I'm bound for New York City, boys, 3,000 miles away.
It wasn't easy to leave our Irish haven at summer's end, but at least we had our memories.
In the evening we'd stop at the old Mayo Inn. There my McNulty play the accordion. On to the Sligo house and lead from house to Mickey Carton, the McNultys, I'll name just a few. The same Irish circle still stands thankfully, where he went many nights to see Ruth Morrissey. Just blocks from the boardwalk we'd swing and we'd sway. With all of our friends we would sing, dance and play. So waltz me by
are a group of youngsters who came to us with jigs and reels, and they just turned us upside down here for a while. This is Kathy Barrett. Kathleen, tell us what you've been doing since we saw you last.
Well, since last time, we had a terrific amount of phone calls and letters from all over the country and all sorts of offers, and it was really very exciting.
You've been doing a lot of practicing?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think they're all set for you over there. Scoot in there, and we will now listen to the Barrett Irish Dancers and Pipers.
Oh, the dancing. Well, it was more or less part and parcel of being an Irish-American girl in the late 40s and 50s when I was, to take Irish dancing lessons, step dancing lessons. And some of us were good at it and some of us weren't. It was nevertheless a thing that most of us were exposed to.
Well, being a kid from Brooklyn, the Irish part of it came later. We didn't tell everyone in the neighborhood that we were doing Irish music and dancing. We kind of kept that a secret because everyone in the neighborhood weren't doing so many ethnic things at the time. So we used to bribe our little sisters to go to the train station with our instruments, and we'd meet them there so that we wouldn't have to walk through the streets with violins and accordions and things like that to go to classes.
My name is Jerry Mulvihill. I'm an Irish dancing teacher from Ireland, and I teach all over here in New York, and I'm teaching here since 1948. I love dancing. I love Irish dancing. I turned out 15 dancing teachers here in this country. When I started to dance in Ireland, I was 5. And I'm dancing since. Actually, I was dancing at 4. And I'm dancing all the way up along the line.
There's many kind of fables about why Irish dancing is structurally the way it is. One story was that the Pope decided it was too provocative to move anything from the way it felt. Another story about why Irish dancing looks the way it is because in Ireland, often there are so many people in pubs that there was no possibility that you could move your arms because people were standing so close to each other and dancing.
Take a trip with me to the way that it used to be way back when time first began. We sat in the paradise watching the stars. We grew up in candy stores, grew old in bars.
After generations of struggle, we have truly arrived in America. Proud as that made us feel, there was a danger. We might forget where we came from. We wouldn't allow that. We knew our greatest glories were yet to come.
Irish eyes are smiling under smiling skies as 122,000 jaunty Hibernians swing down New York's famous Fifth Avenue on St. Patrick's Day. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, Cardinal Spellman reviews the parade, which takes 4 hours to pass. Interested observers are newsreel cameramen who recorded the event.
St. Patrick's Day is a fantastic day for all of us. It is probably the one day out of the year that we know in our hearts and souls that all 43 million plus people who claim to be of Irish heritage, at least for one day of the year, they're with us.
Well, I think a lot of your foreigners, that is to say people from New York and Boston, are offended because we dye the river green. And I don't think anything's wrong with that at all. We can dye it any color we want for the other nationalities. So it's just fun to dye the river green. I like St. Patrick's Day. I think it's a great festival.
For a number of years, the St. Patrick's Day parade in San Francisco was the biggest event in California. Every nationality takes part in the parade in San Francisco. It's not as big as New York, but it's more colorful.
The Irishmen, 100,000 strong, sure it was the Hibernian Brigade, lining up down to start the big parade. So I fetched me Sunday banners and the flag I loved so well, and I bought myself a shamrock just to wear on my lapel. Don't you know that's the day for 17? It's the day for the wearing of the green. It's a great day for the Irish. It's a great day.
My father was very proud of his Irish heritage, and St. Patrick's Day was always a big day for us. Occasionally, since he was a mounted police officer, he'd be in the first rank of the parade, and I say now whenever I watch the St. Patrick's Day parade, I'm watching it as I do every year. I particularly am moved when the mounted police start off leading the parade, and then following them, the politicians in their wake.
I think it's nice that we are allowed it on the greatest street in the world, Fifth Avenue. You know, it would just be the counties marching and the police, and I love the pipe band.
Even on that one day of prideful solidarity, it was a sure bet there'd be at least one Irishman who'd refuse to march in step.
I think St. Patrick was the worst thing that ever happened to Ireland. Because we had a nice pagan religion going there. It was nice and sensual. And occasionally they'd had human sacrifices, but that taught people the value of their lives.
It's the hat me dear old father wore upon St. Patrick's Day. He taught us how respect.
It's hard to believe, but I mean, no matter what race you wore something green, and to this day that's the case. It felt like it was our day. It was quite special.
Well, we had work from school. That was the best part of it.
Major part, yeah.
You wouldn't miss it for the world.
I wouldn't trade that hat for anything on earth. I'll keep it as a relic of the land of Daddy's birth.
I remember my mother, who was a first-generation American, both her parents came from Ireland, pinning some green on me on St. Patrick's Day on my way to school, telling me that if I didn't wear green on St. Patrick's Day, I'd get pinched.
Every St. Patrick's Day, I march in the parade. But on most occasions, people look at me and think I'm really a weird Irishman. But I never wear green on St. Patrick's Day. And I never have. And they ask me why I don't. Because I say to them very simply, I am not a St. Patrick's Day Irishman. I'm an Irishman every day of the year.
What had begun as a holy day of obligation became, in this country, a celebration of freedom, a show of strength, and a day devoted to the pure joy of being Irish.
We celebrate St. Patrick's Day here a lot different than in Ireland. In Ireland, 30 years ago, there was no singing streets or pub being open. They were all closed on St. Patrick's Day because it was a Catholic holiday. So the pubs were all closed the same as on Sunday. But here, thank God, they're not closed on St. Patrick's Day. But the week before and the week after, they're celebrating. The Irish do celebrate St. Patrick's Day.
There were plenty of triumphal parades for the Irish in America. The Notre Dame football team won so often, it warmed the spirit of all fighting Irish fans. But for the true believers, the heart of Irish sport was a world away.
Hurling is the Irish national game. It's
origin lost in antiquity, but its skills formidable and modern. Here at Croke Park in Dublin, where all good hurlers hope to go before they die, the All-Ireland Trophy is at stake today. Get after it, man! Don't just stand there, tackle them! Oh, go! Disgust or delight, the spectator can take his choice in this choice of game, too. Gaelic football has been called the Irish temperament in motion, fiery, fluent, and fearless. The man who guards that goal could look a cannon in the mouth.
Stateside fans faithfully supported their own county association teams at Gaelic Park in the Bronx. Their loyalty was rewarded in 1947 when the All-Ireland Football Championship came to this side of the Atlantic. Thousands packed the polo grounds to see Cavan defeat Kerry, with thousands more in Ireland tuned in to Micheál O'Hare's unforgettable play-by-play on the radio.
Ty collects the ball, sends it into Higgins. Higgins dodges past one man, sends to McDyer. McDyer gets ready to shoot, but he's foiled.
Most of the time, however, the situation was reversed, with American fans gathered in pubs early on Sunday mornings listening to games broadcast from Ireland.
And so ended the All-Ireland final of 1947 with Cavan champions.
We would sit around and I would see these people who would be coming from church, looking in the window and seeing a bar with hundreds of people in it, jumping up and cheering and hollering and screaming because somebody had scored a point or a goal.
You might not guess it, but some of those proper folks peering in the bar window might be able to create a fair amount of excitement of their own, and in a most unlikely place.
I think that the idea of having music in the house goes all the way back to when we were children, because my father and mother would have friends and relatives who played instruments, and they would come in, they'd bring accordions or fiddles, that type of thing.
I've been asked on many, many occasions why Irish music was so popular. I think it's because not only have they magnificent melodies, but most of their songs, the good traditional songs, would have an international flavour to them. I'm a great believer in that the poetry and the music, they're all the one thing, and that the ancient poetry was written to the rhythms of the music, and it's the heartbeat of the people, really.
Pure music, timeless music from an ancient past, a bridge over the generations, back to the source. It whispers and calls us on a journey we all need to take someday.
Kunnen de haft geheren, Ivnes free gach dinner agin, agus tamid buyaktiet. Mr. President, I have thought it fitting that my first words of welcome to you should be in our native language.
I remember there was great excitement about the visit of John F. Kennedy to Ireland. My mother and father and neighbours, people were talking about it for weeks, months beforehand. I was with my mother in Dublin, that a big rally was held to welcome him. I remember holding my mother's hand and her excitement, the excitement of people around her. I had no idea who this man was, but I do remember we were very close to where he was. And this tall man with a big red nose, it must have been a cold day, and he at some stage invited the Irish people to tea in the White House.
It's very hard for people who are not Irish to understand how important that was. To see a young, handsome American president go back to, rural Ireland, to where he came from in County Wexford, and meet his relations there. I mean, it's very, very hard to explain how important that was.
and I think it was as important to people in Ireland as it was to Irish Americans in the United States.
I can remember too that a number of homes that had a triple picture, a Pope in the centre, and a Cardinal Conway on the right, and John F. Kennedy on the left. And I mean, that was very much the mind of people. You know, their Catholicism, but John F. Kennedy as their leading Catholic.
He told my husband and me shortly after he came back from his trip to Ireland, which was the last time we saw him alive at the White House at a dinner, that he had really loved it more than he ever had dreamed that he would or thought that he would, and felt a kinship to the Irish he met on that trip that he never really had understood in himself until he was actually there and saw them and met them and saw the land, and he said it affected him profoundly. And he made a joke. He said to my husband, you know, I'll tell you, great job. He said, when I finish the presidency, I'll still be a young man. I think I'll appoint myself ambassador to Ireland. And then he leaned over and sort of poked Bill and said, and then when I'm finished, you can have it. And that was just 3 weeks before he died.
When his life was cut short, so were our dreams. The loss was agonizing, incalculable. We can never know what John Fitzgerald Kennedy might have done for America, or for a troubled Ireland. But we know one thing he did do. He made us proud to be Irish.
My father told me being Irish meant two things. It meant rooting for the underdog and knowing how to laugh. And I tried to make that a part of my life, and that's what I want to pass on to my children. That's what it really means to be Irish.
I think the Irish are most proud of their faith and their families. I think those are the two rallying points. And they see the commitment to faith and family as something that's very, very Irish, rooted in the values of the country that they came from.
Tremendous satisfaction in knowing that you can be American and Irish at the same time, and that it has a great ring to it, that the Irish-American phenomenon is just amazing.
The thing that so impresses me about the United States is that you can come here and you can get off the plane and you can be American the day you arrive if you want to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you also have to stop being Irish.
There was a baseball player used to say, America is very, very good to me. I don't know who now he was, everyone else will know, but I often think of it and I know what he meant. America, very, very good to me.
I think the good Lord will have a good laugh when he sees us at our humor, at our ability, in spite of great obstacles, to keep going and trying and loving life, living it to the fullest.
May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rain fall soft upon your feet.
Until we meet again, may God hold you
In the hollow
of his hand. Hold my hand along the magic way. All our dreams are just a step away. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your field until we meet again. May God...
Broadcast of this program is made possible by the O'Sullivan Children Foundation, working for a better future for America's children.